30,000 warriors defeated 150,000. A single night cavalry raid decimated the most formidable army in the world. The terror emanating from the Wallachian prince forced the greatest conqueror of all time to retreat. This is no fiction. These were the events of Omia Patru, Suteshisic, Shidoi, when Vlad the Impaler faced the Ottoman Empire at Târgoviște. Consider this. 7,000 horsemen charged into a camp housing 150,000 Ottoman soldiers. On that June night, the survival of Christian Europe hung by a thread. By the end of this story, you will understand how the greatest failure in medieval military history occurred. Why did the conqueror of Constantinople flee from a minor prince? And what terrible price was paid for this incredible victory? I will reveal 3 key secrets. The reconnaissance mission that made the triumph possible, the terrifying spectacle that broke an invincible army, and the personal connection between hunter and prey that changed everything. Perhaps you believe that a 5:1 ratio inevitably leads to defeat. The Ottoman Empire crushed states with much better odds of success. Its Sultan, Mehmed II, had conquered the impenetrable Constantinople just 9 years prior. His army, composed of elite janissaries, equipped with powerful cannons, and possessing inexhaustible reinforcements, knew no true defeat. Against them stood Vlad of Wallachia, 30,000 peasants, nobles, miners, and mercenaries defending a principality smaller than the modern state of South Carolina. Nobody gave him a chance. But this is where the most incredible part begins. Vlad spent years as a hostage at the Ottoman court. He knew their routines, language, and tactics thoroughly. The enemy was known to him better than anyone else, which proved more valuable than any army. Mehmed did not suspect that he was not just invading a foreign country. He was walking into a trap, skillfully set by someone who understood the Ottoman mindset better than his own generals. To understand how this impossible victory was achieved, we must return to the origins of the hatred. Let me take you to medieval Wallachia, where terror was being prepared as a weapon of war. The boy who would become Vlad the Impaler spent 4 years in Ottoman captivity from age 11 to 15 as a political hostage, a guarantee of his father's loyalty. While his younger brother Radu charmed his captors, Vlad watched, memorized the guard shifts, studied military protocols, and mastered the Turkish language. Every humiliation, every beating, every moment of helplessness became the source of the strength that would later manifest. 20 years later, this training in captivity would save his kingdom. But first, the moment that made war inevitable arrived. In 1459, Ottoman envoys arrived in Târgoviște, demanding a tribute of 10,000 ducats and 500 children for the Janissary Corps. Vlad invited them to a feast. When they refused to remove their turbans, citing religious customs, Vlad smirked. Then let me ensure they never fall off. His soldiers nailed the turbans to the envoys' skulls. The screams lasted for hours. The message was unambiguous. Wallachia would bow to no one. Mehmed did not suspect that this cruelty was not random. Vlad had learned at the Ottoman court that extreme actions provoke extreme reactions. Fear, applied with calculation, could turn a small force into something terrifying. Mehmed was no ordinary sultan. He was the man who had achieved the impossible by conquering Constantinople in 1453. The 1,000-year-old Byzantine Empire fell under the blows of his cannons and his strategic genius. Christian Europe trembled. At 29, he commanded the world's most disciplined army and had never lost a major campaign. To him, Wallachia was merely a bothersome pebble in his boot. He intended to crush this upstart prince and continue his march into the heart of Europe. But during the winter of 1461-1462, something unsettling occurred. Ottoman border detachments began to disappear. Entire patrols went missing. Then reports started arriving that made even experienced commanders nervous. During Wallachian raids, 23,884 Turks and their supporters were eliminated. Not approximately exactly counted. Vlad kept precise records. Bodies were found in their beds, at their posts, in their fortresses. The Impaler struck everywhere and then vanished. Here, the numbers become startling. Wallachia was a buffer state between Ottoman expansion and the Kingdom of Hungary. Its population barely reached 500,000. The Ottomans controlled territories from Anatolia to the Balkans, commanding millions. In any logical world, this conflict should have lasted days, not months. But Vlad did not play by logical rules. He wrote new ones, rules written in the language of psychological warfare and calculated terror. He understood that Wallachia could not win by force, but through fear, by turning the land itself into an enemy, it was possible. Then came the moment that changed everything. Mehmed decided to finish it personally. When spring arrived, Mehmed gathered an army the likes of which Wallachia had never seen. The Ottoman force that crossed the Danube in May 1462 exceeded all imaginable scales. Conservative estimates speak of 100,000 men. Some sources claim 150,000. Others point to 300,000. In particular, 120 massive cannons moved north, the same ones that destroyed the legendary walls of Constantinople. The baggage trains stretched for many kilometers, including siege machines, field kitchens, and mobile workshops. This was not a regular raid or a punitive expedition. This was total conquest. The Janissaries constituted an iron corps, elite infantry raised from childhood for war. They were fearless and ruthless. 20,000 of the Sultan's picked men, supplemented by Sipahi cavalry and allied troops. Mehmed II personally led the army, accompanying his guard and his personal retinue. The Conqueror of Constantinople craved total victory. It was here that Vlad's Ottoman education came in handy. He knew that Janissary discipline relied on strict order and routine. By disrupting this, even elite troops could be made vulnerable. Against such an immense force, Vlad led perhaps 30,000 men, local militia armed with whatever came to hand, noble boyars fighting for their lands, and Hungarian and Moldavian mercenaries paid with promises. No cannons, no siege machines, only desperation, knowledge of the terrain, and a commander who understood the enemy's psychology better than they did themselves. But Vlad had learned something extremely important from those years as a hostage. Large armies require massive supply lines. The Ottomans were accustomed to living off conquered lands, replenishing supplies at the expense of local resources. Therefore, Vlad gave an order that went down in history: burn everything to the ground. Granaries turned to ash, wells were filled with corpses and filth, livestock were driven into the mountains or slaughtered and left to rot. Every village in the Ottomans' path became a ghost town. The land itself turned into an enemy. This scorched earth tactic was not only a military strategy but a psychological blow. Vlad wanted the Ottomans to be hungry, thirsty, and increasingly nervous, wondering what enemy was capable of destroying their own land just to deny it to a conqueror. Then followed an even more brutal step. Vlad had observed the hygiene protocols in Ottoman camps during his captivity. He knew how quickly diseases spread in large armies. Therefore, he sent his soldiers into the Ottoman ranks. Plague carriers, sick peasants dressed in Ottoman clothing who spoke fluent Turkish, infiltrated the vast camp. They shared water, food, and stories. Within days, dysentery and fever began their invisible assault. The reports from scouts seemed impossible but were true. The mighty Ottoman army was suffering even before the first real battles. But these were hardened veterans. They had participated in campaigns from Belgrade to Baghdad. Minor difficulties could not stop them, or so Mehmed II thought. The Sultan's response shocked everyone. Instead of slowing down, he accelerated the pace. A forced march through the devastated terrain was ordered. His message was clear: Wallachia's resistance will be broken by pure force and speed. But, lurking in the shadows, Vlad's scouts tracked every step. Former Ottoman hostages who spoke Turkish perfectly counted tents, marked positions, and remembered the daily routine. This is where the plot takes a sharp turn. Vlad knew he could not match the Ottomans in numbers, but he didn't need to. He needed to get close enough for a perfect strike. Planning began for something that defied all military canons: a direct assault on an army 5 times his size. But first, he needed information that could only be obtained from one source. When Mehmed II's massive army crossed the Danube, it entered lands turned into an absolute hell. The very first day in Wallachia showed the Ottomans what the coming war would be like. The vanguard unit found the first village empty, with doors swinging in the wind. Granaries were merely charred skeletons. The water in the wells was poisoned. By the 3rd day, the situation had not changed. Every settlement was abandoned, every resource destroyed. The mighty Ottoman war machine, accustomed to feeding itself through conquest, found only ash and emptiness. Soldiers began to whisper, "Where are the inhabitants? Where is the resistance?" Then night fell, and they all understood. Arrows whistled from the darkness, finding gaps in armor. Sentries vanished silently, horses screamed, swallowed by trap pits, and entire cavalry patrols fell beneath the earth. At dawn, dozens were dead or missing, but not a single enemy body remained, only arrows, traps, and mounting fear. The Wallachians struck and dissolved like ghosts. But the worst was yet to come. The plague carriers had done their job too well. By the end of the first week, thousands of Ottoman soldiers were writhing in abdominal pain. Fever spread through the ranks, and the overwhelmed medical service could not identify the source. Was it bad water, spoiled rations, or something more sinister? Imagine entering a camp of 150,000 enemies, knowing that disease and fear were already working in your favor. One Ottoman soldier, let's call him Yusuf, wrote in a found diary, "The earth itself is fighting us. My brother fell yesterday from swamp fever, Ahmed from an arrow at night. We do not see an enemy army, but we are dying by the dozens. The Christians have made a deal with demons." Here is a detail that still strikes historians. Vlad's spy network included former Janissaries, Ottoman Christians who had fled service, and Wallachians living in Turkish territories. They moved through the Ottoman camp like shadows, recording every trifle. Time of guard changes, password systems, location of supply depots, and most importantly, the location of Mehmed's command tent. These were not random guerrilla sorties. Every attack had a purpose. Strikes at gunpowder wagons to create fear of explosions, killing officers to disrupt the chain of command, poisoning fodder for cavalry horses. Vlad was preparing them for something unprecedented. Then Vlad did something completely unexpected. On June 14, he sent an envoy to Mehmed. The message was simple: meet me in open battle at Târgoviște. Let us end this with honor. The Ottoman generals laughed. Did this madman think his 30,000 peasants could withstand the Sultan's might in an open battle? Mehmed saw through the ruse. Vlad wanted to lure them into his chosen territory, but the Sultan was confident. Let Vlad the Impaler choose his own grave. What happened next surpassed all military logic. When the Ottoman army made camp on June 16, just 2 days' march from Târgoviște, Vlad made a decision that would forever enter military history. He could not wait for the Ottomans to reach his chosen battlefield. Guerrilla actions had weakened them, but not enough. He needed something decisive, something that would use the Ottomans' strength against them. The Ottomans were about to learn what happens when you learn warfare from your enemies. Vlad gathered his brave horsemen, 7,000 men who understood that this was likely suicide. But their prince had a plan based on reconnaissance data. The plan was so detailed and precise that it could work. The fact was, during his captivity, Vlad learned something extremely important about the protocols of Ottoman knights. There was a fatal flaw in their camp security system that only someone who had lived among them could know. But to prepare, Vlad needed to see the camp himself to verify his spies' reports. What he undertook next was either genius or madness, perhaps both. He was going to personally infiltrate the Ottoman camp. Only imagine such audacity, a prince condemning himself to certain death if caught, slipping among 150,000 enemies. The plan was insane. Carry out a night strike with a small part of his forces, create enough chaos to break the Ottomans' fighting spirit, attack the officers' supplies, and above all, sow panic. But first, Vlad needed to inspect the camp personally. This is where the 4 years of captivity were to yield their final fruits. On the night of June 16, Vlad prepared to do the unimaginable. He donned the clothes of a Turkish merchant. His flawless Ottoman and Turkish language, learned during his years of captivity, would be his shield. 6 of his best scouts, all Wallachians fluent in Ottoman, joined him. They approached the massive camp, disguised as merchants looking for army quartermasters. The guards barely looked at their forged passes. Why would they? Who would be insane enough to walk into certain death? Inside the camp, Vlad's trained eyes registered everything. Janissary sections marked by their characteristic high tents, cargo wagons, grouped by type, gunpowder here, food there, horse lines, paths between groups of tents. But most importantly, he noticed a large pavilion in the very heart of the camp. The military tent of Mehmed towered over the others, marked by 3 golden crescents. Guards stood at regular intervals. Vlad counted steps, memorized faces, noted when shifts changed, then followed the discovery that changed everything. The Ottoman Knights' password system followed a specific pattern. Each section had its own phrase, but they all used a common response. More importantly, In the darkness and chaos of such a huge camp, sentries relied more on language than actual recognition. Speak Turkish like a native, know the answer, and you could move almost freely. Almost. What Mehmed didn't know was that Vlad had just solved the puzzle of the attack. An army 5 times his size, and its greatest strength, its massive size, would turn into a weakness. In daylight, organization and numbers made them invincible, but in the dark, in the chaos, everything was different. Returning to the Wallachian camp, Vlad gathered his 7,000 horsemen. These were not just soldiers. These were people who had lost families in Ottoman raids, whose lands had faced the threat of conquest. A priest blessed them, knowing that most would not survive until dawn. But then Vlad revealed his reconnaissance data. They would not attack blindly. They would follow specific routes, strike at precise targets. Groups of 500 would simultaneously attack different sectors. The goal was not to fight 150,000 people. The goal was to make 150,000 people fight each other. Midnight approached. The night was moonless. Vlad chose this very night. The horsemen wrapped their horses' hooves in cloth to muffle the sound. They darkened their armor to eliminate light reflection. Each group commander had a sketch of his sector based on Vlad's intelligence. Primary targets: officer tents marked with banners. Secondary: supply wagons. Third: creating maximum chaos. This is where the madness began. The attack started not with a charge, but with infiltration. Turkish-speaking Wallachian scouts passed the sentries unnoticed. Using the passwords they had obtained, they reached the gunpowder wagons and lit slow-burning fuses, hoping to slip away before hell began. Other saboteurs cut ropes holding horses, loosened tent pegs, and scattered iron caltrops on escape roads. Then, exactly at midnight, 7,000 horsemen poured in from 7 directions. The Ottoman perimeter guard died before they could raise the alarm. Crossbow bolts found throats in the darkness. The cavalry breached the external defense like a flood against a dam, and then the gunpowder wagons exploded. Fire and thunder tore through the night. Massive fireballs rose into the sky, briefly turning the night into a hellish day before the camp was plunged back into deep darkness. Confused Ottomans leapt out of tents straight onto Wallachian spears. But here Vlad's genius shone. The attackers shouted in Turkish, giving contradictory orders. "Christians on the east flank, take the supply position. The Sultan is under attack." In the darkness, Ottoman soldiers could not distinguish friend from foe. Hearing Turkish cries, they mistook the attackers for allies. Seeing silhouettes in Ottoman gear stolen during past raids, they hesitated. This hesitation proved fatal. Janissaries rushing to protect the Sultan collided with Sipahis and Akinji, reacting to different alarm signals. In the chaos, they began to kill each other. Cries in Turkish and Romanian merged into a deafening nightmare. Orders contradicted one another. Officers roared commands, only to fall from unseen blows. Tents collapsed when their stakes were pulled, burying people inside. Horses running amok added to the chaos. The Wallachians turned the Ottoman camp into a death trap of their own making, but the slaughter had only just begun. Vlad himself led the charge on Mehmed's tent. This was the main goal: kill the Sultan, and the invasion would cease. 200 of the best Wallachian horsemen formed a spearhead aimed at the heart of the camp. They cut through confused opponents, navigating by the layout of the tents that Vlad knew by heart. But something was wrong. The tent loomed before them exactly where it should have been. The golden crescent shimmered in the firelight. Vlad's spear pierced the first guard. His sword found the second. They burst into the tent, ready to deliver the fatal blow. But instead of Mehmed, they found his Grand Vizier, frantically grabbing for his sword. The Sultan had changed tents as a precaution. It was a habit from military campaigns. The moment of pure genius turned into near disaster. The Janissaries, finally organized, were converging on the tent. These elite troops did not succumb to the panic like the others. They formed a wall of steel and discipline. Vlad had minutes, perhaps less, before he would be destroyed. He made the only sensible decision: retreat. Horns echoed through the burning camp, a signal for all groups to pull back, but hidden in the darkness. The damage was already catastrophic. Supply trains were burning. Officers lay dead. Thousands of Ottomans had killed each other in the confusion. The camp that had gone to sleep organized, woke up in an apocalypse, as the Wallachian cavalry dissolved into the night. They left behind more than death. They left behind doubt. If 7,000 men could do this, what would happen when they reached the battlefield chosen by Vlad? Dawn showed the cost. 15,000 Ottomans lay dead, killed by Wallachians, fire, and their own comrades in the mayhem. Hundreds of supply wagons were smoldering. The medical corps, already overwhelmed by disease, now faced thousands of wounded. But Mehmed was alive, shaken, furious, but alive. The Janissary commander brought even worse news. Among the dead were dozens of high-ranking officers, irreplaceable veterans who knew how to manage such a huge army. What happened in those 3 hours will be discussed for centuries. How did the outnumbered manage to cause such immense damage? The answer lay in honed psychological warfare. Vlad turned the Ottomans' own strengths against them. Their numbers became the cause of confusion. Their discipline became the cause of friendly fire. When they could not identify enemies, their confidence turned into vulnerability. The Sultan's response surprised everyone. Instead of retreating to regroup, he ordered an immediate move to Târgoviște. Mehmed understood the game. Vlad had dealt them severe wounds, but had not achieved his main goal. The Ottoman army still significantly outnumbered the Wallachians. If they could force a conventional battle, their numbers would tell. Break through the pain, ignore losses, and crush this annoying prince once and for all. But Vlad had one more ace up his sleeve. The night attack was never intended to completely crush the Ottomans. It was intended to prepare them for a psychological blow of such devastating power that even the Conqueror of Constantinople would flinch. All the guerrilla raids, the poisoned earth, the night attack, everything was carefully planned to drive the Ottomans into a certain state of mind, one of absolute exhaustion, demoralization, and fear. At dawn, when Vlad's cavalry dissolved into the distance, 15,000 dead Ottomans remained on the battlefield. But the true horror was yet to come. The march to Târgoviște turned into a death march. Ottomans, exhausted by the night attack, stumbled through hostile territory. No rest, no respite. Mehmed drove them forward. The Sultan understood that delay was death. If the Wallachians were given time to regroup, to prepare new surprises, his army might crumble from fear alone. But what awaited them would break even the strongest will. June 17 brought the first harbingers. Ottoman scouts reported something strange ahead. Tall silhouettes on the horizon, too uniform for trees. When the army climbed the last hill before Târgoviște, the vanguard units stopped so abruptly that the ranks behind them slammed into each other. Hardened veterans who had conquered cities from Belgrade to Baghdad froze. Some fell to their knees, others vomited. Before them lay a forest of the dead, but these were not trees. These were stakes. 20,000 wooden poles rose from the earth in perfect geometric patterns, and on each stake, the stench hit them first in the summer heat. 20,000 corpses in various stages of decay created a stench that made even brave men weep. The buzzing of millions of flies created an unholy drone, as if the earth itself were groaning. But the true genius lay in the details. These were not random victims. Vlad had arranged them by rank. Ottoman soldiers recognized uniforms, faces. There is the captain who went missing on patrol. There is the tax collector who disappeared months ago. The stakes grew higher toward the center, creating an amphitheater of death. And at the highest point, on a stake that required a special structure to raise, sat the figure that broke the Ottoman command. Hamza Pasha, the Sultan's beloved general and close friend, had been captured months earlier. The Sultan had assumed he was dead, but he was there, impaled on the highest stake, positioned so he appeared to be staring at the Ottoman army with dead eyes. His armor still shone. His beard was neatly trimmed. Vlad had kept him especially for this moment, a message written in flesh and friendship. Imagine what those Ottoman soldiers saw, a statement of absolute will. Each stake required hours of preparation. Each body had to be raised and positioned. The geometric precision was not random. It demonstrated planning, patience, a terrifying purpose. This was not battlefield cruelty. This was psychological warfare elevated to an art. The forest spoke a language that only conquerors understand. This is what awaits you all. Mehmed rode forward. His face was a mask. Historical accounts vary on his exact words, but the meaning was clear. A man who can do such things to his own land, to anyone who opposes him, such a man cannot be defeated. He can only be avoided. The Sultan, who had breached the impenetrable walls of Constantinople, who had never known true defeat, looked at Vlad's masterpiece and understood something fundamental. Some victories are costlier than any defeat. The Ottoman army began to disintegrate. Whispers spread through the ranks. Will we be impaled next? Will we join this forest? Ordinary soldiers recoiled. Even the janissaries muttered prayers. The image burned into every consciousness. 20,000 stakes, 20,000 warnings, and somewhere nearby, the man who had organized it all was waiting with his remaining forces. Then came the spectacle that completely broke the empire's will. Children's voices rose from the walls of Târgoviște. A church choir was singing Orthodox hymns. The contrast between the innocent song and the field of death created a cognitive dissonance that crushed morale. Vlad had thought through even this detail, knowing how this juxtaposition would affect minds already pushed to the limit. What happened next still troubles historians. Mehmed, the conqueror whose name made kings tremble, gave an order that stunned his entire command structure. Retreat, not a regrouping, not a search for weaknesses, but a total withdrawal. The man who conquered Constantinople turned his army back. His stated reason: I cannot take land from such a man. Let him keep his throne. But his eyes, witnesses say, never left the towering corpse of Hamza Pasha. The retreat began as an orderly withdrawal but turned into something akin to a flight. Ottoman soldiers, convinced that Wallachian demons lurked in every shadow, abandoned supplies in their haste. The mighty army that had entered Wallachia as conquerors left as psychological casualties. Behind them, Vlad's forest of the dead stood as a testimony to a will triumphing over numbers. But hidden in those stakes was a final message. The bodies were organized not only by rank, but by origin. Here are Turkish soldiers. There are Bulgarian allies. Further on Serbian recruits. Vlad demonstrated a perfect knowledge of Mehmed's army composition, the origin of every soldier, and what would cause them the most pain. This eerie precision, like the ruthlessness, instilled terror. This was not madness, it was strategy. The consequences proved even worse. As Ottoman troops retreated, the path was marked by fresh stakes, new corpses, the bodies of stragglers and scouts who had ventured too far. Vlad's remaining 6,000 horsemen relentlessly pursued them, adding to the forest one corpse at a time. The message was unequivocal. The slaughter would not end at Târgoviște. In war, perception can be deadlier than swords. Vlad had erected an impenetrable fortress built in the minds of his enemies. Every surviving Ottoman soldier told this story. Every future invasion remembered that forest. The greatest victory lay not in the bodies left behind, but in the sowed fear that forced the conqueror of Constantinople to turn his army around. But why? The full answer only confirmed his significance, the echoes of which reached all of Europe. Vlad mastered what would forever change military affairs: psychological impact instead of physical destruction. Think about it. He never defeated the Ottoman army in open battle, nor could he, but he broke their will to fight, which proved far more effective. The forest of the dead became a mental barrier more impenetrable than any fortress wall. Future Ottoman expeditions into Wallachia remembered Târgoviște and found reasons to conduct campaigns elsewhere. The strategic consequences resonated throughout Europe. Mehmed's retreat not only saved Wallachia but gave decisive time to Hungary, Poland, and the Habsburg lands to prepare their defenses. Ottoman expansion into Europe slowed down, in part, thanks to this psychological deterrence. When an unstoppable force collided with a mobile will, it chose to go around, not break through. It is this detail that still stuns historians. The resistance of one small principality changed the course of the continent's history. But Vlad did not stop. With 6,000 horsemen, he harassed Ottoman supply lines all the way to the Danube. Small groups attacked at night, leaving stakes as calling cards. The mighty Ottoman army, which had entered Wallachia with the sound of drums and flying banners, returned home in disgrace, weakened in numbers and spirit. The court poets of Constantinople, who usually sang of Mehmed's victories, remained silent regarding the Wallachian campaign. Consider what kind of man plans this level of psychological warfare. Vlad understood that to defeat an empire, one must attack its self-perception. The Ottomans believed in their inevitable expansion, in their divine right to rule. The forest of the dead spoke otherwise. It declared that some people, some lands, would prefer to create hell on earth than submit. This message went far beyond military strategy. The long-term impact on European relations was significant. Future sultans approached Balkan campaigns with new caution, fearing the possibility. Wallachia became known as a graveyard for invaders. Its reputation protected it no less than any army. Sometimes the greatest fortress is the one built in the enemy's consciousness, and from this historical truth grew something unexpected: the legend of Dracula, the man who saved Christian Europe with psychological warfare, through centuries of retelling, turned into something supernatural. But real history surpasses fiction. Vlad Dracula did not need vampire power. His understanding of fear, his readiness to use terror as a weapon, his ability to turn weakness into psychological strength, all of this proved more powerful than any myth. Remember, these were not just soldiers who died at Târgoviște. These were messages, each carefully constructed and placed. Precision in horror, method in madness. That is what broke Mehmed, not just the cruelty, but the intelligence behind it. When titans collide, the earth remembers. And the land of Wallachia remembered in stakes and screams. 30,000 truly defeated 150,000, not by force, but by the understanding that terror itself can be a weapon. Vlad learned in Ottoman captivity that empires are held together by confidence. Destroy that confidence, make victory psychologically too costly, and even conquerors will retreat. David not only defeated Goliath but terrified him into submission. This echoes through history as proof that numbers do not determine the outcome. Will determines, understanding determines, and sometimes, the willingness to become worse than your enemy. Yes, history unfolded at a critical moment, on a dark night when Vlad missed Mehmed's tent. However, perhaps it was that failure that ensured success. A killed sultan would have been replaced. A traumatized sultan who ordered a retreat created a legend that protected Wallachia for generations. In the end, Mehmed learned that some people cannot be defeated. They can only be avoided, only feared, only remembered in the nightmares of the empire.